I stood in the kitchen, my hands gripping the edge of the counter so tightly, my knuckles turned white. Michael's words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. "Lily, we need to talk about Mom," he said, his voice tinged with that familiar mix of guilt and determination. I turned to face him, my heart already sinking. "What about her?" Michael ran a hand through his graying hair. "Her house needs emergency repairs, the foundation's cracking, and it's not safe for her to stay there." "Okay," I said slowly, bracing myself for what I knew was coming next. "She needs to move in with us, just for a few months until the work's done." The words hit me like a physical blow. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "Michael, we can't. You know how she is. She'll take over our lives." "She's my mother, Lily. What am I supposed to do? Let her live in a dangerous house?" I could feel the frustration building inside me. "There are other options. We could help her find a short-term rental, or—" "We can't afford that," Michael cut me off. "And she won't go for it anyway. She's family. This is what family does." I bit back a bitter laugh. Family. As if Martha had ever treated me like family in the 30 years I'd been married to her son. "Did you already tell her yes?" I asked, already knowing the answer. Michael's silence was confirmation enough. "Of course you did," I said, my voice rising. "Without even talking to me first. This is our home, Michael. Our life. Don't I get a say?" "I'm sorry, Lily," he said, not sounding sorry at all. "But it's done. She'll be here next week." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. "Next week? Michael, that's not enough time to—" "To what?" he snapped. "To come up with more excuses? She's coming, Lily. End of discussion." I watched him storm out of the kitchen, leaving me alone with the weight of his decision crushing down on me. I sank into a chair at the table, my mind reeling. Martha, living here. The thought alone was enough to make me want to run screaming from the house. The phone rang, startling me out of my daze. I answered it without thinking. "Hello, dear," came Martha's saccharine voice. "I hear I'll be staying with you for a while. Won't that be lovely?" I gritted my teeth. "Hello, Martha. Yes, Michael just told me." "Oh, good. I'm sure you'll make me feel right at home. You always were such a competent little homemaker." I could practically hear the sneer in her voice. "I'll do my best," I managed to say. "I'm sure you will," Martha said. "Oh, and dear, I hope you don't mind, but I'll need to bring Fluffy with me. You know how attached she is to her special chair. I'm sure you can find somewhere else to sit in the evenings." Fluffy, Martha's ancient, ill-tempered cat that hated everyone but her, and her special chair was my favorite reading spot in the living room. "Of course," I said, my free hand clenching into a fist. "Whatever makes you comfortable." "Wonderful. I knew you'd understand. See you next week, dear." The line went dead, and I let the phone drop from my hand. I stared at it, lying there on the table as the full reality of what was about to happen crashed over me. Martha was coming. She was going to invade my home, criticize my every move, and make my life a living hell. And Michael, the man who was supposed to be my partner, my protector, had invited her in without a second thought. I stood up, my legs shaky. I needed air. I needed space. I didn't know what I needed, but I knew one thing for certain. My life was about to change, and not for the better, and I had no idea how I was going to survive it. The day Martha moved in, our house transformed into a battleground. I'd spent the week preparing, scrubbing every surface until it gleamed, hoping to avoid her criticism. It didn't work. "Oh, Lily," Martha said, wrinkling her nose as she stepped inside. "You really should dust more often. I can see cobwebs in that corner." I bit my tongue, forcing a smile. "I'll take care of it, Martha." Michael lugged in her suitcases, grunting with effort. "Where do you want these, Mom?" "The guest room, of course," she said, as if it were obvious. "Though I suppose we should start calling it my room now." I felt a twinge of panic. "But that's my office. I need that space for work." Martha's eyes narrowed. "Work? At your age? Shouldn't you be thinking about retirement, dear?" "I'm only 58, I protested, "and I love my job." "Well, I'm sure you can find somewhere else to play with your computer," Martha said dismissively. "A grown woman shouldn't need a whole room for a hobby." I looked to Michael, silently pleading for support. He avoided my gaze. "Mom's right, Lily," he said. "You can set up your laptop in the living room or something." I felt like I'd been slapped. "But it's settled then," Martha interrupted. "Michael, be a dear and move my things in." "Lily, why don't you make us some tea?" I retreated to the kitchen, my hands shaking as I filled the kettle. This was only the beginning, and already I felt like a stranger in my own home. The next few days were a blur of snide comments and barely concealed insults. Martha criticized everything from my cooking to my clothes to the way I folded towels, and Michael, the man who once promised to stand by me through thick and thin, said nothing. One evening, I was working late on a project, my laptop balanced precariously on the arm of the sofa. Martha's cat, Fluffy, had claimed my favorite chair, hissing whenever I got too close. "Still pecking away at that thing?" Martha's voice made me jump. "It's nearly 9 o'clock, you know. A wife should have dinner on the table by now." I gritted my teeth. "Michael knows I have a deadline. He said he'd order pizza." Martha clicked her tongue disapprovingly. "Take out food at your age? No wonder you're putting on weight. When I was your age." "I'm not putting on weight," I snapped, my patience finally wearing thin. Now, Martha said, her voice dripping with false concern. "There's no need to be defensive. I'm just looking out for your health. After all, you're not getting any younger, are you? And with no children to care for you in your old age?" The barb about my childlessness hit home as she knew it would. I blinked back tears, refusing to let her see how much it hurt. "I have work to do," I said, my voice tight. "Of course you do," Martha sighed. "It's a shame, really. If you'd focused more on being a proper wife and mother instead of chasing a career, things might have been different. Michael always wanted children, you know." I slammed my laptop shut, unable to take any more. "I'm going to bed." As I stormed past her, Martha called out, "Oh, and Lily, do try to be quieter in the morning. Your stomping around wakes me up, and I need my beauty sleep." I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, Michael snoring softly beside me. How had it come to this? How had I let myself become a doormat in my own home? Something had to change. I couldn't go on like this, swallowing my anger and hurt day after day. But what could I do? As I drifted off into an uneasy sleep, a plan began to form in my mind. If Martha and Michael wouldn't listen to my words, maybe they needed to hear them played back. Tomorrow, I decided, I would buy a voice recorder. It was time to gather evidence of the hell my life had become. Little did I know, that decision would set in motion a chain of events that would change everything. The tiny voice recorder felt like a lifeline in my hand. I'd bought it on my lunch break, heart pounding as I handed over the cash. Now, back home, I slipped it into my pocket, my fingers brushing against the smooth plastic for reassurance. "Lily, is that you?" Martha's voice rang out from the living room. "Come in here, we need to talk." I took a deep breath, pressed the record button, and stepped into the lion's den. Martha sat in my chair, Fluffy curled in her lap. Michael stood by the window, his back to me. "There you are," Martha said, her tone dripping with false sweetness. "Michael and I have been discussing your situation." I felt a chill run down my spine. "My situation?" "Your work, dear. It's becoming a problem." I glanced at Michael, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. "What do you mean?" Martha sighed dramatically. "You're never home, always hunched over that computer. It's not healthy, and it's certainly not fair to Michael." "I'm providing for us," I said, my voice tight. "My job is important." "More important than your family?" Martha's eyes narrowed. "Michael tells me you haven't even started dinner yet. It's already 6 o'clock. I bit back a retort, acutely aware of the recorder in my pocket. "I was planning to cook after I finished my project." "See?" Martha turned to Michael. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. No wonder you two never had children. She's too busy playing career woman to be a proper wife." The words hit me like a physical blow. I looked to Michael, silently begging him to defend me. He cleared his throat. "Mom's right, Lily. Maybe it's time to think about cutting back at work. We could use the help around here." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Michael, my job pays our mortgage. It's not some hobby I can just give up." "Don't be dramatic," Martha scoffed. "Michael makes plenty. You don't need to work. Unless—" She paused, her eyes glinting maliciously. "Unless you're planning to leave him. Is that it? Are you squirreling away money for a divorce?" "What?" "No," I sputtered, shocked by the accusation. Michael finally turned to face me, his expression a mix of hurt and anger. "Is that true, Lily? Are you planning to leave me?" I felt like I was drowning, gasping for air in a sea of absurdity. "Of course not. How could you even think that?" "Well, what are we supposed to think?" Martha interjected. "You're always working. Never home. You barely speak to Michael anymore. If you're not saving for a divorce, then what exactly are you doing? I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. How had we gotten here? How had my hard work and dedication become twisted into something sinister? I think, Martha said, her voice low and dangerous, that it's time you made a choice, Lily. Your family or your precious career? Michael nodded, his face set in grim lines. She's right, Lily. Something has to change. I stood there, frozen, as the weight of their words crashed over me. They were asking me to give up everything I'd worked for, to become the subservient housewife I'd never wanted to be. In that moment, something inside me snapped. A lifetime of swallowing my anger, of biting my tongue, of trying to please everyone but myself. It all came rushing to the surface. No, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. What was that? Martha leaned forward, her eyes glittering with triumph. I straightened my spine, looked her dead in the eye, and said, No, I won't choose. I won't give up my career, and I won't let you bully me anymore. The room fell silent. Martha's mouth hung open in shock. Michael stared at me like he'd never seen me before. I turned on my heel and walked out, my heart pounding in my chest. As I climbed the stairs to what used to be my office, I could hear Martha's shrill voice behind me. Michael, are you going to let her speak to me like that? Do something. But I didn't stop. I didn't look back. For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. The recorder was still running in my pocket, capturing every word. This was just the beginning. The day of Ruth's 80th birthday arrived, and I felt sick to my stomach. I'd spent the past week avoiding Martha and Michael as much as possible, retreating to our bedroom with my laptop whenever I could. The voice recorder had become my constant companion, capturing every snide comment and heated argument. As we pulled up to Ruth's house, I plastered on a smile. Ready? I asked Michael. He grunted in response, barely looking at me. We'd hardly spoken since my outburst, the silence between us growing heavier by the day. Martha tottered out of the back seat, already unsteady on her feet. She'd started drinking in the car, claiming it was to calm her nerves. I bit my tongue, knowing any comment would only lead to another fight. Ruth greeted us at the door, her face lighting up when she saw me. Lily, dear, so good to see you. She pulled me into a warm hug, then turned to Michael and Martha with a noticeably cooler demeanor. Hello, you two. I felt a small surge of satisfaction at Ruth's obvious preference for me. At least someone in this family was on my side. The party was in full swing, the backyard filled with friends and relatives. I mingled, grateful for the chance to talk to people who didn't constantly belittle me. But I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled in my stomach. That feeling proved justified when Martha clinked her glass, demanding everyone's attention. I'd like to make a toast, she slurred, her eyes unfocused, to my darling son, Michael, and his wife. I tensed, sensing trouble. Michael, Martha continued, her voice growing louder, you've always been such a good boy, so patient, even when you married beneath you. A hush fell over the crowd. I felt all eyes turn to me, my cheeks burning with humiliation. Mom, Michael said weakly, maybe we should sit down, but Martha was on a roll. No, I need to say this. Lily here, she thinks she's so smart with her fancy job, but what kind of wife is she? Can't even give you children, can't even cook a decent meal. I stood frozen, unable to believe this was happening. Where was my voice recorder? I needed proof of this moment, this public humiliation. And now, Martha went on, swaying slightly, now she's trying to turn you against me. Your own mother. Well, I won't stand for it. It's time you put her in her place, Michael. Tell her who's really important in this family. I turned to Michael, silently pleading with him to stop this, to defend me. But to my horror, he nodded. You're right, Mom, he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent yard. Lily's been selfish. She needs to learn her place. The world seemed to tilt around me. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. All I could feel was the weight of dozens of pitying stares. Ruth's voice cut through the fog. That's quite enough, she said sharply. Martha, Michael, you should be ashamed of yourselves. But the damage was done. I turned and ran, tears blurring my vision. I found myself in Ruth's guest bathroom, locking the door behind me. As I splashed cold water on my face, I caught sight of my reflection in the mirror. Who was this woman staring back at me? This broken, humiliated shell of a person? No, I wouldn't let them do this to me. I wouldn't let them reduce me to nothing. With shaking hands, I pulled out my phone and the voice recorder. I had weeks of evidence, weeks of abuse and gaslighting and manipulation. It was time to use it. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I was about to do. This would change everything. There would be no going back. But as I replayed Martha's drunken tirade in my mind, as I remembered Michael's betrayal, I knew I had no choice. It was time to fight back. I unlocked the bathroom door, my head held high. Let them think they'd broken me. Let them think they'd won. They had no idea what was coming. I emerged from the bathroom, my heart pounding but my resolve firm. The party had resumed its uneasy chatter, but I could feel the weight of curious glances. Martha's drunken tirade had left a palpable tension in the air. Ruth approached me, concern etched on her face. "Lily, dear, are you all right?" I managed a tight smile. "I will be, Ruth. Thank you." She squeezed my hand. "I'm so sorry about Martha and Michael. Their behavior is inexcusable." "You're right," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "and I'm not going to excuse it anymore." Ruth's eyes widened as I strode purposefully towards the center of the gathering. I caught sight of Michael and Martha, huddled together near the punch bowl. They both looked up as I approached, Martha's face twisting into a sneer. "Well, look who decided to grace us with her presence again," she slurred. "Come to apologize for ruining the party?" I didn't respond. Instead, I pulled out my phone and the voice recorder, connecting them with shaking hands. "What are you doing?" Michael asked, his brow furrowed. "Something I should have done a long time ago," I replied. Before they could stop me, I pressed play. Martha's voice, shrill and cruel, filled the air. "You're a disgrace, Lily. A barren, useless woman. Michael deserves better than you." Gasps rippled through the crowd. I watched as shock and horror dawned on the faces around me. Michael lunged forward, trying to grab the recorder. "Turn that off!" But I danced out of his reach, letting the recordings continue. His own voice joined his mother's, agreeing with her insults, laughing at her cruel jokes. "You see," I said, my voice rising above the cacophony of recorded abuse. "This is what I've been living with. This is what they're really like behind closed doors." Martha's face had gone pale. You've been spying on us?" "No," I retorted. "I've been protecting myself, gathering evidence of the emotional abuse you've subjected me to for years." The recordings kept playing, a litany of insults and degradation that seemed to go on forever. I watched as disgust and anger replaced the pity in the eyes of our friends and family. Finally, Ruth stepped forward, her face a mask of fury. "That's enough," she said, her voice trembling with rage. "Martha, Michael, I want you both out of my house. Now." "But, Mom," Michael protested weakly. "No buts," Ruth snapped. "I've heard enough. What you've done to Lily is despicable. I'm ashamed to call you my son." As security escorted a protesting Martha and a shell-shocked Michael out, I felt a strange mix of vindication and exhaustion wash over me. The nightmare was finally over, but at what cost? Ruth approached me, tears in her eyes. "Lily, I had no idea. I'm so sorry you've had to endure this." I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. "What will you do now?" she asked gently. The question hung in the air, heavy with implications. I looked around at the faces of our friends and family, some supportive, others uncomfortable. I thought about the house I'd returned to, now tainted by months of abuse and betrayal. In that moment, I knew I couldn't go back. Couldn't pretend things could ever be the same. "I don't know," I admitted. "But I know I can't stay with Michael. Not after this." Ruth nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Whatever you decide, you have my support. Your family, Lily, the kind of family I'm proud to have." As the party slowly dispersed, I stood alone in Ruth's backyard, watching the sun set on the life I'd known. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with legal battles and emotional turmoil. But for the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope. I'd found my voice, my strength. And I knew whatever came next, I would face it on my own terms. The recorder sat heavy in my hand, a testament to my resilience and a key to my freedom. Tomorrow, I decided I would call a divorce lawyer. It was time to start my new life. The days following Ruth's birthday party were a whirlwind. I'd moved out of our house, staying with a sympathetic coworker while I sorted out my next steps. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from Michael, alternating between angry accusations and desperate pleas for forgiveness. I ignored them all. Today, I sat in my lawyer's office, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. The recordings I'd made were spread out on the desk between us, along with financial documents and other evidence of Michael and Martha's mistreatment. "This is strong stuff, Lily," Sarah, my lawyer, said. "With this evidence, we have a solid case for emotional abuse and grounds for divorce." I nodded, a mix of relief and anxiety churning in my stomach. "What's our next step?" "We file for divorce and—" Sarah was cut off by a commotion outside her office. The door burst open, and Michael stormed in, his face red with anger. Martha trailed behind him, her eyes darting around the room. "How dare you?" Michael shouted, slamming his hands on the desk. "You think you can just walk away and destroy our family?" I flinched but held my ground. "There's nothing left to destroy, Michael. You and Martha took care of that." Sarah stood, her voice stern. "Mr. Thompson, you need to leave. This is a private meeting." Michael ignored her, his gaze fixed on me. "You manipulative bitch. Those recordings? They're out of context. You've turned everyone against us." "The recordings speak for themselves," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Everyone heard the truth." Martha stepped forward, her face a mask of false concern. "Lily, dear, we're worried about you. You're not thinking clearly. Come home and we can work this out as a family." I almost laughed at the absurdity. "Family? You've never treated me like family. You've both made it clear that I'm nothing but a nuisance, a failure as a wife and woman." "That's not true," Michael protested, but his words rang hollow. Sarah moved towards the door. "I'm calling security. You need to leave now." As if on cue, 2 security guards appeared in the doorway. Michael's face contorted with rage. "You'll regret this," he snarled. "I'll make sure you walk away with nothing. You hear me? Nothing." As the guards escorted Michael and Martha out, I felt my resolve wavering. Was I really prepared for the battle ahead? Sarah returned to her seat, her expression grim. "I'm sorry about that, Lily, but their behavior only strengthens our case." I nodded, trying to steady my breathing. "What did Michael mean about me walking away with nothing?" Sarah's eyes narrowed. "Let's take a closer look at those financial documents." As we pored over bank statements and investment records, a sickening realization dawned on me. Large sums of money had been moving out of our joint accounts for months, funneled into accounts I didn't recognize. "He's been hiding assets," Sarah said, her voice tight with anger. "Preparing for this, most likely." I felt the room spin around me. All those years of hard work, saving, planning for our future, and Michael had been systematically dismantling it behind my back. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Sarah's expression was determined. "We fight. We'll need forensic accountants, maybe even private investigators. It won't be easy, Lily, but we can prove what he's done." I closed my eyes, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what lay ahead. The divorce, the financial battle, the inevitable smear campaign Michael and Martha would wage against me. It all seemed insurmountable. For a moment, I considered giving up. Maybe it would be easier to crawl back, to accept Michael's version of events, to return to the life I knew, no matter how miserable. But then I thought of the recordings, of the years of abuse and gaslighting. I thought of Ruth's support, of the shocked faces at the party when they heard the truth. I couldn't go back. Not now. Not ever. I opened my eyes, meeting Sarah's gaze. "Okay," I said, my voice growing stronger. "Let's do this. Whatever it takes, I'm ready." As Sarah began outlining our strategy, I felt a strange mix of terror and exhilaration. The road ahead would be hard, but for the first time in years, I was fighting for myself, and I was determined to win. The courtroom buzzed with tension as I took my seat beside Sarah. Across the aisle, Michael and Martha sat with their lawyer, both of them glaring daggers at me. I forced myself to look straight ahead, focusing on the judge's empty chair. This was it. The culmination of months of legal battles, financial investigations, and emotional turmoil. Everything I'd fought for hung in the balance. As the judge entered and the proceedings began, I found myself reliving the journey that had brought me here, the recordings that had exposed the truth, the shocking discovery of Michael's hidden assets, the grueling depositions where I'd had to relive every moment of abuse and betrayal. Sarah squeezed my hand reassuringly as she stood to present our case. Her voice was clear and confident as she laid out the evidence of emotional abuse, financial deception, and the systematic effort to undermine my self-worth and independence. "Your Honor," Sarah said, The recordings you're about to hear demonstrate a clear pattern of emotional abuse perpetrated by both Mr. Thompson and his mother against my client. As the first recording played, I watched the judge's expression change from neutral to disturbed. Martha's shrill voice filled the courtroom, spewing vitriol about my supposed failings as a wife. Michael's voice chimed in, agreeing and adding his own cruel comments. I risked a glance at Michael and Martha. Martha's face was red with anger, while Michael looked pale and sick. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for them. Almost. Their lawyer tried to argue that the recordings were taken out of context, that they were private family matters not meant for public consumption. But the judge wasn't buying it. Context or not, the judge said sternly, this behavior is unacceptable. As the financial evidence was presented detailing Michael's elaborate scheme to hide assets, I saw his shoulders slump. He knew he was caught. Just when I thought it was all over, Martha suddenly stood up, her voice shrill and desperate. This is all a lie. Lily's the abusive one. She manipulated Michael, turned him against me. She's trying to steal everything we have. The judge called for order, but Martha was beyond reason. She pointed at me, her face contorted with rage. You ungrateful whore, after everything we've done for you. In that moment, something inside me snapped. All the fear, all the self-doubt, all the years of swallowing my anger, it all came rushing out. I stood, my voice ringing clear and strong. No, Martha, you've done nothing for me except try to break me down. You and Michael both. But I'm not broken. I'm stronger than I've ever been. The courtroom fell silent. I could feel all eyes on me, but for once I didn't shrink from the attention. I'm not here to steal anything, I continued. I'm here to reclaim my life, my dignity, and the future you tried to take from me. And no matter what happens today, I've already won, because I'm free of you both. Martha sputtered incoherently, but Michael just stared at me, a mix of shock and something that looked almost like admiration on his face. The judge called for a recess, and as the courtroom emptied, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. Whatever the outcome, I knew I'd done the right thing. As we waited to be called back in, Sarah turned to me, her eyes shining with pride. That was incredible, Lily. You've come so far. I nodded, surprising myself with a small smile. I have, haven't I? Just then, a court officer approached us. The judge would like to see both parties in chambers, he said. My heart raced as we followed him. This was it, the moment of truth. As we entered the judge's chambers, I took a deep breath, steeling myself for whatever came next. Win or lose, I was ready to face my future on my own terms. The judge's chambers felt suffocating as we all gathered around her desk. Michael and Martha stood on one side, their lawyer whispering urgently to them. Sarah and I stood on the other, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure everyone could hear it. Judge Hawkins looked at each of us in turn, her expression unreadable. I've heard enough, she said finally. And frankly, I'm appalled by what I've seen and heard today. She turned to Michael and Martha. Your behavior has been reprehensible. The emotional abuse, the financial deception, it's all grounds for a fault divorce. Michael's face fell, while Martha looked like she might explode. But the judge wasn't finished. Mr. Thompson, your attempts to hide assets are particularly troubling. I'm inclined to award Mrs. Thompson not just half of the marital assets, but punitive damages as well. I felt a surge of vindication, but it was tempered by a strange sadness. This was really the end of my marriage, of the life I'd known for so long. The judge turned to me. Mrs. Thompson, I commend your bravery in coming forward. It's clear you've been through a terrible ordeal. Thank you, Your Honor, I managed to say. However, she continued, I'm concerned about the recordings. While they've proven invaluable as evidence, they were obtained without consent. In light of the circumstances, I'm choosing not to pursue any legal action regarding them, but I want to be clear that this is not something I condone. I nodded, understanding the fine line I'd walked. Now, the judge said, I have a proposal for you all. We can continue this trial, air all your dirty laundry in public, and I'll make my ruling. Or you can agree to mediation right now and settle this privately. There was a moment of tense silence. Then, to my surprise, Michael spoke up. I'll agree to mediation, he said quietly. When Martha started to protest, he silenced her with a look. It's over, Mom. We've lost. The next few hours were a blur of negotiations. In the end, we reached an agreement that left me with more than half of our assets, including the house. Michael would pay alimony, and Martha would have no contact with me. As we left the courthouse, I felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, sadness, and an overwhelming sense of freedom. Ruth was waiting outside, her face anxious. When she saw me, she rushed over and enveloped me in a hug. "Oh, Lily," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "I'm so proud of you." As we pulled apart, I saw Michael and Martha exiting the building. Martha stormed off without a word, but Michael hesitated, then approached us. "Lily," he said, his voice low, I'm sorry for everything." I looked at him, this man I'd loved for so long, and felt a complex mix of anger, pity, and something like forgiveness. "I hope you find peace, Michael," I said finally, "and I hope you learn from this." He nodded, then walked away. I watched him go, feeling the last threads of our life together finally snap. Ruth squeezed my hand. "What now, dear?" I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the past few months finally lifting. "Now, I start living for myself." In the weeks that followed, I threw myself into rebuilding my life. I redecorated the house, erasing all traces of Martha's presence. I reconnected with old friends and made new ones. I even started taking art classes, something I'd always wanted to do, but never had the courage to try. Ruth and I grew closer. Our bond strengthened by the trials we'd faced together. She became the mother figure I'd always longed for, supportive and loving without being overbearing. One evening, as we sat on my porch watching the sunset, Ruth turned to me with a smile. "You know, Lily, I always knew you had this strength in you. I'm just glad you finally see it too." I smiled back, feeling a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. "Me too, Ruth. Me too." As the sky turned from gold to purple, I reflected on my journey. I'd lost a husband and a life I thought I wanted, but I'd gained something far more valuable: myself. At 58, I was starting a new chapter, one filled with possibilities I'd never dared to imagine before. And for the first time in a long time, I was excited for what the future might hold. The sound of shattering glass jolted me from my thoughts. I rushed to the kitchen, my heart pounding, to find Alex standing over a broken vase, his face twisted in frustration. "Damn it, Laura, why'd you put this here?" he snapped, gesturing at the shards scattered across the floor. I bit back a retort. The vase had been in the same spot for years. "I'm sorry, dear. I'll clean it up." As I knelt to gather the pieces, Alex huffed and stormed out of the room. I heard the front door slam moments later. So much for our quiet Sunday afternoon. I sighed, dumping the broken glass into the trash. My phone buzzed, and I saw a text from my father-in-law, Victor. "Laura, can you come by? Need to talk. Important." Curiosity piqued. I grabbed my keys and headed out. Victor was waiting on the porch when I arrived, his usually jovial face creased with worry. "Laura, thank goodness you're here," he said, ushering me inside. "Is Alex with you?" I shook my head. "He went out. What's wrong, Victor?" He led me to the living room, where we sat on the floral-patterned couch. "I need to tell you something, but you have to promise to keep it between us." "Of course," I said, concern growing. "What is it?" Victor took a deep breath. "I went to the doctor last week. The results, they're not good, Laura. I have cancer, stage 4. The words hit me like a physical blow. "Oh, Victor," I whispered, reaching for his hand. "I'm so sorry. Does Judith know?" He shook his head. "No, and I don't want her to. Not yet. You know how she gets." I did know. My mother-in-law's overbearing nature would only make things worse. "But Alex." "Not Alex either," Victor said firmly. "Please, Laura, I need time to process this myself before I deal with their reactions." I nodded, though keeping such a secret felt wrong. "What can I do to help?" "Just be here," he said, squeezing my hand. "I may need someone to talk to, someone who won't fuss or panic." "Of course," I promised. "Anything you need." As if on cue, we heard the front door open. Judith's voice rang out. "Victor, are you home?" Victor's eyes widened in panic. I squeezed his hand reassuringly before calling out, "In here, Judith. Just stopped by for a quick hello." Judith appeared in the doorway, her eyes narrowing as she took in the scene. "Laura, what a surprise." I stood, forcing a smile. "I was just leaving, actually. Thanks for the chat, Victor." As I moved to leave, Judith's hand on my arm stopped me. "Before you go, dear, have you given any thought to what we discussed? About the summer house?" I blinked, confused. "I'm sorry?" "The inheritance, dear," Judith said, her voice sickly sweet. Victor and I aren't getting any younger, you know. It's important to have these things sorted out. I glanced at Victor, who looked uncomfortable. I don't think now's the time. Nonsense, Judith interrupted. It's never too early to plan. We wouldn't want any misunderstandings later on. The implication in her words made my skin crawl. I forced another smile. Of course not, but I really must be going. As I drove home, my mind raced. Victor's illness, Judith's thinly veiled greed, Alex's indifference, it was all too much. I pulled into our driveway, steeling myself for whatever mood Alex might be in. The house was quiet when I entered. I found Alex in his study, engrossed in something on his computer. "Hey," I said softly, "everything okay?" He barely glanced up. "Fine. Where were you?" "Just visiting your parents," I said, watching his reaction carefully. "Your dad seemed off." Alex shrugged. "Probably just tired. Did Mom say anything about the will?" His casual tone sent a chill down my spine. "The will? Why would she?" "No reason," he said quickly. "Just curious." As I left the room, a sinking feeling settled in my stomach. Something was very wrong in this family, and I was caught right in the middle of it. The next morning, I woke to an empty bed. Alex had already left for work, not bothering to say goodbye. I sighed, pushing away the hurt. There were more pressing matters to attend to. I arrived at Victor's house just after 9, armed with homemade soup and a forced smile. Judith answered the door, her eyes narrowing suspiciously. "Laura, what are you doing here?" I held up the soup container. "I thought I'd bring something over for Victor. He mentioned not feeling well yesterday." Judith's lips thinned. "How thoughtful. I'm sure he'll appreciate it, though. He's resting now." As she spoke, Victor appeared behind her. "Is that Laura? Come in, dear." Judith's scowl deepened, but she stepped aside. I followed Victor to the living room, feeling Judith's eyes boring into my back. "How are you feeling?" I asked softly once we were seated. Victor glanced towards the kitchen where Judith had disappeared. "Not great," he admitted. "The pain's getting worse." My heart ached. "Have you considered telling them? They should know, Victor." He shook his head firmly. "Not yet. Judith would smother me. And Alex?" He trailed off, a look of disappointment crossing his face. I understood. Alex's indifference towards his father was painfully obvious. "At least let me help more," I pleaded. "I could drive you to appointments, bring meals." "What appointments?" Judith's sharp voice cut through the room. We both jumped, not having heard her approach. Victor recovered first. "Just a checkup, dear, nothing to worry about." Judith's eyes darted between us, suspicion clear. "I see. And Laura's going to drive you, is she? How convenient." The accusation in her tone made my cheeks burn. "I just offered to help." "I'm sure you did," Judith interrupted. "You're always so helpful, aren't you, Laura? Especially when it comes to my husband." I gaped at her, shocked by the implication. Victor stood abruptly. "That's enough, Judith. Laura's family." Judith's laugh was cold. "Family? Please. She's after something, mark my words." "The only one after something is you," I snapped, my patience finally breaking. "All you care about is what you might inherit." The room fell silent. Judith's face turned an alarming shade of red. "How dare you? I think you should leave," Victor said quietly. It took me a moment to realize he was talking to me. Hurt and anger warred within me as I gathered my things. As I reached the door, I heard Judith's triumphant voice. "I always knew she was trouble, Victor. It's about time you saw it, too." I drove home in a daze, tears blurring my vision. How had things gone so wrong? I was only trying to help, to honor Victor's wishes. Now I'd been all but banned from the house. When I arrived home, I was surprised to find Alex's car in the driveway. I found him in the kitchen, rifling through drawers. "You're home early," I said cautiously. He barely glanced up. "Looking for Dad's old business papers. Mom called, said I should check on some investments." My blood ran cold. "Investments? What are you talking about?" Alex sighed impatiently. "The family trust, Laura. Dad's not getting any younger, and we need to make sure everything's in order." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Your father isn't even dead, and you're already divvying up his assets?" "Don't be dramatic," Alex scoffed. "It's just good planning, not that you'd understand." The casual cruelty of his words stung. "You should be more concerned about your father's health than his money," I said, my voice shaking. Alex finally looked at me, his eyes narrowing. "What's that supposed to mean? Do you know something?" I hesitated, torn between keeping Victor's secret and exposing the truth. Before I could decide, Alex's phone rang. He answered. turning away from me. Mom? Yeah, I'm looking now. Don't worry, we'll figure it out. As he spoke, a realization hit me like a thunderbolt. Alex and Judith were in this together, plotting behind Victor's back, and I was the only one who could stop them. I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled in my stomach. For days, I'd been trying to reach Victor, but my calls went unanswered. Even my attempts to visit were thwarted by Judith's icy presence at the door. "He's resting," she'd say, her eyes gleaming with barely concealed triumph. Best not to disturb him. On the 5th day, I decided enough was enough. I drove to their house, determined to see Victor no matter what, but as I pulled up, I saw an ambulance in the driveway, its lights flashing silently. My heart pounding, I rushed to the front door. It swung open before I could knock, revealing Alex's ashen face. "What happened?" I demanded, pushing past him. "Dad's gone," Alex said, his voice hollow. He passed in his sleep. The world tilted beneath my feet. "No," I whispered, "that's impossible. I just spoke to him last week. He was fine." Alex's eyes narrowed. "Was he? You seemed awfully concerned about his health lately. What did you know, Laura?" Before I could respond, Judith appeared, her face a mask of grief. But there was something in her eyes, a calculating gleam that made my skin crawl. "Oh, Laura," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "If only you'd been here. Victor asked for you, you know, right at the end." The accusation in her words was clear. I felt my cheeks burn with anger and guilt. "I tried to come," I said. "You wouldn't let me in." Now, Judith soothed, patting my arm. "There's no need for hysteria. What's done is done." As the paramedics wheeled Victor's body out, covered in a sheet, I felt a piece of my heart break. I'd failed him. I should have told Alex and Judith about his illness, should have insisted on being there. "We'll need to start planning the funeral," Alex said, his voice oddly detached. "Mom and I were thinking you could handle the arrangements, Laura. You're good at that sort of thing." I stared at him, incredulous. "You want me to plan the funeral? For your father?" Judith nodded, her eyes glittering. "It's the least you could do, dear. After all, you weren't here when he needed you most." The unfairness of it all threatened to choke me, but as I looked at their expectant faces, a sudden clarity washed over me. They were setting me up, using me as a scapegoat for their own neglect. "Fine," I said, my voice steady. "I'll take care of everything." As I turned to leave, I heard Judith murmur to Alex, "Make sure she doesn't go overboard. We don't want to deplete the estate unnecessarily." I clenched my fists, fighting back tears of rage. How could they be so callous, so focused on money when Victor had just died? Back at home, I sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by funeral brochures and to-do lists. But my mind was elsewhere, replaying every interaction with Victor over the past weeks. Something wasn't right. Victor had been ill, yes, but not on death's door. And the way Alex and Judith were acting, it was all wrong. My phone buzzed with a text from Alex. "Don't forget to pick up Dad's suits from the dry cleaner, and make sure you get itemized receipts for everything." I stared at the message, a chill running down my spine. They weren't grieving. They were covering their tracks. As I sat there, a terrible suspicion began to form in my mind. What if Victor's death wasn't natural? What if Alex and Judith had... No, I couldn't even think it. But the pieces were falling into place, painting a picture too horrifying to contemplate. I looked at the funeral plans spread before me and made a decision. I would play along for now, but I would find out the truth about Victor's death, no matter what it cost me. And if my suspicions were correct, I would make sure Alex and Judith paid for what they'd done. The day of Victor's funeral dawned gray and somber, matching my mood perfectly. I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting my black dress, my mind racing with suspicions and half-formed plans. I had to find out the truth. But how? At the church, I watched as mourners filed in, their faces a mix of grief and curiosity. I'd planned everything meticulously, just as Alex and Judith had demanded, but I had a few surprises in store. As I took my seat in the front pew, I felt Alex's hand on my shoulder. "You did good, Laura," he whispered, his breath hot against my ear. "Dad would have appreciated it." I fought the urge to shrug off his touch. "I'm sure he would have," I replied, my voice steady despite the anger boiling inside me. The service began, a parade of hollow eulogies from people who barely knew Victor. When it was Alex's turn to speak, I steeled myself for more lies. "My father was a great man," Alex began, his voice thick with fake emotion. He always put family first and taught me the value of hard work and perseverance. I almost laughed out loud. Alex had never worked hard a day in his life, and the only thing he'd inherited from Victor was his money. But then, Alex's speech took an unexpected turn. In fact, just before he passed, Dad and I had a long talk about the future of our family business. He was so excited about the new direction we were planning to take it. I sat up straighter, my heart pounding. What was Alex talking about? Victor had never mentioned any business plans to me. Of course, Alex continued, his eyes darting to Judith. Mom was instrumental in helping us make these decisions. She always knew what was best for Dad. A murmur rippled through the congregation. I glanced at Judith, who was nodding along, a small smile playing on her lips. Suddenly a voice rang out from the back of the church. That's not true. All heads turned to see Victor's old business partner, Frank, standing up. Victor never wanted to change the business. He told me just last week he was thinking of selling it and retiring. The church erupted in whispers. Alex's face turned pale, while Judith's eyes blazed with fury. How dare you? She hissed at Frank. This is a funeral, not a business meeting. But Frank wasn't finished. And what's this about Judith being involved? Victor always said she had no head for business. He wouldn't have let her anywhere near those decisions. I watched in stunned silence as chaos unfolded. Alex stumbled through the rest of his speech, sweat beading on his forehead. Judith sat rigid, her knuckles white as she gripped her purse. As we filed out of the church, I overheard Alex and Judith arguing in hushed tones. How could you be so stupid? Judith snapped. Mentioning the business like that? Now everyone will be asking questions. I was trying to establish our claim. Alex shot back. How was I supposed to know that old fool Frank would be here? We need to be more careful, Judith warned. If anyone starts digging... Their voices faded as they moved away, but I'd heard enough. My suspicions were confirmed. They were hiding something, and it had to do with Victor's death and the family business. As I walked to my car, my mind was made up. I couldn't confront them directly. Not yet. I needed proof, and I knew just where to start looking. I pulled out my phone and dialed Frank's number. Hello, Frank. It's Laura. We need to talk about Victor. There's something not right about all this, and I think you can help me figure out what. As I hung up, I felt a mix of fear and determination. I was stepping into dangerous territory, but for Victor's sake, I had to uncover the truth. Whatever Alex and Judith were hiding, I was going to find out. And when I did, they would pay for what they'd done. The days following Victor's funeral were a blur of forced smiles and barely concealed tension. I played my part, the dutiful daughter-in-law, while secretly meeting with Frank to unravel the mystery surrounding Victor's death and the family business. One evening, as I was sorting through Victor's belongings, a task Alex had conveniently delegated to me, I stumbled upon a hidden compartment in his old desk. My heart raced as I carefully extracted a small leather-bound journal. As I flipped through the pages, Victor's familiar handwriting revealed a shocking truth. He had suspected Alex and Judith of embezzling funds from the company for months. The last entry, dated just days before his death, sent chills down my spine. I confronted Alex today. He denied everything, but I saw the guilt in his eyes. I'm meeting with my lawyer tomorrow to change my will. I can't let them get away with this. My hands shook as I closed the journal. Victor had known. He was going to expose them, and they... No, I couldn't let myself think it. But the evidence was mounting. Lost in thought, I didn't hear the front door open. Alex's voice startled me back to reality. Laura, what are you doing in here? I quickly shoved the journal into my bag. Just sorting through some papers like you asked. Alex's eyes narrowed suspiciously. Find anything interesting? No, I lied smoothly. Just old receipts and documents. He nodded, seemingly satisfied. Well, don't spend all night on it. Mom's coming over for dinner to discuss the reading of Dad's will. My stomach churned at the thought of sitting across from them, knowing what I now knew, but I had to keep up appearances. Of course. I'll start dinner soon. As Alex left the room, I let out a shaky breath. I needed to act fast, but I had to be careful. One wrong move, and I could lose everything, including my life. During dinner, I watched Alex and Judith closely, noting their shared glances and cryptic comments about the will. I played my part, nodding and smiling at the appropriate moments, all while my mind raced with plans. As Judith was leaving, I overheard her whisper to Alex, "Make sure she doesn't suspect anything. We're too close to let it all fall apart now." That night, unable to sleep, I slipped out of bed and made my way to Alex's study. With trembling hands, I booted up his computer. Thanks to years of his carelessness, I knew his password. What I found made my blood run cold. Emails between Alex and Judith discussing not just the embezzlement but plans to take care of Victor if he became a problem. The last email, sent the day before Victor's death, simply read, "It's done. No loose ends." I stifled a gasp, my mind reeling. They had actually done it. They had killed Victor to cover up their crimes. As I was about to log off, a new email notification popped up. It was from Judith. The lawyer called. "We'll reading tomorrow at 2 p.m. Make sure Laura doesn't attend. We can't risk her finding out about the changes Victor made." My heart pounded in my chest. They were planning to cut me out completely to ensure their secret remained safe. In that moment, staring at the damning evidence on the screen, I made my decision. I couldn't confront them directly. It was too dangerous. But I couldn't let them get away with this either. With shaking hands, I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I never thought I'd use. "Detective Johnson, this is Laura Matthews. I need to report a murder." As I hung up, a mix of fear and determination washed over me. There was no turning back now. Tomorrow, at the will reading, everything would change, and I would be ready. My heart pounded as I entered the lawyer's office, Victor's journal and a small recording device hidden in my purse. Alex and Judith were already there, their faces masks of false grief. The lawyer, Mr. Simmons, nodded gravely as I took my seat. "Mrs. Matthews, I'm glad you could join us," he said, his eyes flickering to Alex and Judith. "Shall we begin?" Alex cleared his throat. "Actually, I don't think Laura needs to be here for this. It's a family matter after all." I felt a surge of anger. "I am family, Alex. I was Victor's daughter-in-law for 20 years. Before Alex could argue, Mr. Simmons intervened. "Mr. Matthews, your father specifically requested Mrs. Matthews' presence for the reading of the will." I saw a flash of panic cross Alex and Judith's faces. This wasn't part of their plan. Mr. Simmons began reading the will, and with each word, the tension in the room grew thicker. Victor had left the bulk of his estate to charity, with only a small portion going to Alex and Judith. But the real bombshell came at the end. "And to my dear daughter-in-law, Laura," Mr. Simmons read, "I leave my personal effects and the contents of my private safe, including all documents pertaining to the family business." The room exploded into chaos. Judith leapt to her feet, her face contorted with rage. "This is preposterous. She has no right." Alex grabbed my arm, his fingers digging painfully into my skin. "What did you do?" he hissed. "What lies did you tell my father?" I wrenched my arm free, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "I didn't tell him anything, Alex, but maybe you should explain what you and your mother have been up to." Mr. Simmons looked bewildered. "I'm not sure I understand." "Oh, I think you will," I said, pulling out Victor's journal and the recording device. "I have evidence of embezzlement and worse." Alex lunged for the journal, but I was quicker. I pressed play on the recording device, and his own voice filled the room. "Mom, it's done. Dad won't be a problem anymore. Make sure you destroy all the evidence of the transfers." The color drained from Alex and Judith's faces. Mr. Simmons stood, his expression a mix of shock and disgust. "I think I need to call the authorities." What happened next was a blur. Alex made a desperate grab for the evidence, knocking over a lamp in the process. In the chaos, Judith slipped out of the room. I clutched Victor's journal to my chest, backing away from Alex's advancing form. "You don't understand," he snarled, his eyes wild. "We had no choice. Dad was going to ruin everything." "By exposing your crimes?" I shot back. "You killed him, Alex. Your own father." Suddenly, the door burst open. Detective Johnson, whom I'd called the night before, entered with 2 uniformed officers. "Alexander Matthews, Judith Matthews, you're under arrest for the murder of Victor Matthews and embezzlement." As the officers handcuffed a stunned Alex, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. It was over. Justice for Victor was finally within reach, but my relief was short-lived. As they led Alex away, he turned to me, his eyes burning with hatred. "This isn't over, Laura. You'll pay for this. I swear, you'll regret the day you crossed us." As the door closed behind them, I sank into a chair, the full weight of what had just happened crashing down on me. I had exposed the truth, but at what cost? My marriage, my safety, my entire life as I knew it was now in shambles. Mr. Simmons placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. "Mrs. Matthews, are you all right?" I looked up at him, tears blurring my vision. "I don't know," I whispered. "What happens now?" Little did I know, the worst was yet to come. Alex's threat wasn't empty, and the battle for justice and my own survival was far from over. The courtroom buzzed with tension as I took the stand. Alex and Judith glared at me from the defendant's table, their eyes burning with hatred. I swallowed hard, reminding myself why I was here. For Victor. For justice. "Mrs. Matthews," the prosecutor began, "please tell the court about the document you found in your late father-in-law's safe." I took a deep breath. It was a letter addressed to me. Victor knew what Alex and Judith were up to. Suddenly, Alex's lawyer jumped up. "Objection! Hearsay!" The judge nodded. "Sustained. Mrs. Matthews, please stick to what you personally witnessed." I felt a flicker of panic. How could I tell Victor's story without his words? But then I remembered his final gift to me. "Your Honor, I have Victor's final video message. He recorded it the day before he died." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Alex's face turned ashen, while Judith gripped the table so hard her knuckles turned white. As the bailiff set up the video, I caught Frank's eye in the gallery. He gave me an encouraging nod. We'd prepared for this moment, but nothing could have truly readied me for what came next. Victor's face filled the screen, his eyes tired but determined. "Laura, if you're watching this, then I'm gone, and things have probably gotten very ugly. I'm sorry for putting you in this position, but you're the only one I can trust." He went on to detail the embezzlement scheme, how he'd confronted Alex and Judith, and his fears for his own safety. "I've left everything to charity," he continued. "There's nothing left for them to fight over. The only thing of value I have is the truth, and I'm entrusting that to you, Laura." As the video ended, the courtroom was dead silent. I looked at Alex and Judith, expecting to see defeat. Instead, I saw something that chilled me to the bone. Calculation. The defense attorney stood. "Your Honor, while this video is certainly dramatic, it proves nothing. Mr. Matthews was clearly not in his right mind at the time of recording. We have medical records." "Objection," the prosecutor interrupted. "The defense has presented no such records." As the lawyers argued, I felt a tap on my shoulder. It was Detective Johnson, his face grim. "Mrs. Matthews, we need to get you out of here." Confused, I followed him out of the courtroom. In the hallway, he turned to me, his voice low. "We just got word. Judith's disappeared, and we have reason to believe she's not working alone." My blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" "There's a larger organization involved. The embezzlement. It goes way beyond just your family's company. You're in danger, Laura." Just then, a commotion erupted from the courtroom. We rushed back in to find Alex gone. The window behind the defendant's table shattered. As chaos engulfed the room, I stood frozen. The weight of what was happening crashing down on me. This wasn't just about Victor anymore. It was about a conspiracy bigger than I could have imagined, and I was at the center of it all. Detective Johnson grabbed my arm. "We need to get you to a safe house. Now." As we rushed out of the courthouse, my mind raced. How had things spiraled so out of control? I'd wanted justice for Victor, but now I was running for my life. In the car, I clutched Victor's journal to my chest. It was all I had left of him, of the truth. But as we sped through the city, sirens blaring behind us, I realized the truth might not be enough to save me. I looked out the window, the world blurring past. "What have I done?" I whispered, tears stinging my eyes. But there was no going back now. I was in too deep, and the only way out was through. As we pulled up to a nondescript building, Detective Johnson turned to me, his face grave. "Are you ready for this, Laura? Because from here on out, nothing will ever be the same." I took a deep breath, steeling myself for whatever came next. "I'm ready," I said, hoping I sounded more confident than I felt. It was time to finish what Victor had started, no matter the cost. 6 months after the courtroom chaos, I stood at the podium, facing a sea of reporters and flashing cameras. My hands trembled slightly as I gripped the edges of the stand, but my voice remained steady. "Today, I stand before you not just as Laura Matthews, but as a voice for all those who have been silenced by greed and corruption," I began. The investigation that followed Alex and Judith's escape had uncovered a web of deceit far larger than anyone had imagined. Corporate fraud, money laundering, and connections to organized crime, it all came tumbling down like a house of cards. The Matthews Corporation, once a beacon of success, was built on lies and the exploitation of honest, hard-working people, I continued. But today we reclaim what was stolen, not just money, but trust, dignity, and justice. I saw Frank in the crowd, nodding encouragingly. He had been my rock through this ordeal, helping me navigate the complex world of corporate finance and legal battles. Victor Matthews was not just my father-in-law. He was a man of integrity who tried to stop this corruption and paid for it with his life. My voice cracked slightly, but I pushed on. His final act was to entrust me with the truth, and I stand here today to honor that trust. As I spoke, I thought of the past months, the sleepless nights poring over documents, the constant fear of retribution, the moments of doubt when it all seemed too overwhelming. But I had persevered, driven by a determination I never knew I possessed. Alex and Judith Matthews have been apprehended, I announced, a ripple of excitement passing through the crowd. They, along with their co-conspirators, will face the full extent of the law. The news had broken just hours before. After months on the run, they had been caught trying to flee the country. It was over, truly over. But this is not just about punishment, I continued. It's about restoration. The Matthews Foundation, once a front for illegal activities, will be restructured. Under new leadership, it will focus on supporting victims of corporate fraud and advocating for stronger oversight in the business world. As I concluded my speech, the room erupted in applause. Reporters clamored with questions, but I stepped back, emotionally drained yet oddly exhilarated. Later that evening, I stood in Victor's old office, now mine. The weight of responsibility settled on my shoulders, but it no longer felt crushing. Instead, it was a mantle I was ready to bear. A soft knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. It was Detective Johnson. "Quite a speech, Mrs. Matthews," he said with a smile. "You've come a long way from that scared woman in the courtroom." I returned his smile. "I had good people supporting me, including you, Detective." He nodded, then his expression turned serious. "I have something for you. We found it in Judith's possession when we arrested her." He handed me a small, worn notebook. With trembling hands, I opened it. It was Victor's handwriting, dated entries from his final days. As I skimmed the pages, tears welled in my eyes. "He knew," I whispered. "He knew what they were planning, but he couldn't prove it. That's why he left everything to me." Detective Johnson squeezed my shoulder gently. "He chose well. You've done him proud, Laura." As he left, I sank into Victor's old chair, clutching the notebook to my chest. The journey had been long and painful, but I had emerged stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever. I looked out the window at the city skyline, the future stretching out before me. There was still so much work to do, so many wrongs to right. But for the first time in years, I felt truly alive, truly purposeful. "We did it, Victor," I whispered to the empty room. "We brought them to justice. And I promise you, this is just the beginning." As the sun set over the city, casting a golden glow across the office, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The past was behind me, the future uncertain but full of possibility, and I was ready to face it head-on, armed with the truth and the strength I had discovered within myself. The end of one chapter, but the beginning of so much more. The breeze whipped my hair across my face as the cherry blossoms rained down around us. I looked over at Nolan, taking in his chiseled jawline and kind eyes. He had one hand rested gently on the back of my wheelchair as he pushed me along the winding path in the park. "It's so beautiful here," I said. "Thank you for bringing me." "Of course, darling," Nolan replied, leaning down to plant a soft kiss on my forehead. "I'd do anything for you, you know that." I smiled up at him, my heart swelling. After the accident that left me paralyzed, Nolan had been my rock. He took care of my every need, catering to my wheelchair, helping me bathe, making sure I took my medications. I didn't know what I would do without him. We continued through the park, the pavement smooth beneath my wheelchair. Up ahead, the path sloped downwards towards a small bridge crossing a stream. "Oh, look, the bridge," I said. "Let's stop for a moment once we cross." "Of course," Nolan said, his voice suddenly tense. As we started down the slope, he pivoted my chair sideways. Before I could ask what he was doing, he leaned down, his lips nearly touching my ear. "I'm bankrupt," he whispered harshly. "I've blown through your inheritance. I need that life insurance money if we're going to live comfortably." My heart dropped into my stomach as words registered. "What are you saying?" I gasped. "I'm so sorry about this, darling." With that, he shoved my wheelchair forward with immense force. I screamed as I hurtled down the steep slope, bracing myself as the wheelchair hit the bottom and flipped over, tossing me onto the hard ground. Sharp pain radiated through my body and my vision blurred. "Nolan!" I tried to shout, but it came out as a whimper. I heard his footsteps crunching on the gravel as he approached. When he leaned over me, his face was a mask of anguish. "Oh my God, Alara!" he cried. "I'm so sorry. I lost control of your wheelchair. Here, let me get you back in." As he righted the wheelchair, disbelief flooded through me. He was pretending that this was an accident. He scooped me up and gently placed me back in the seat, his brows knitted together in feigned worry. I scanned the area wildly, but we were alone. "What have you done?" I choked out, barely able to get the words out past the pain in my ribs. "Shh," he soothed. "Try not to move. You might have broken something. I'm going to call an ambulance." As he pretended to dial his phone, I saw a flash of panic cross his face. His plan had gone horribly wrong. He knelt down next to me again, taking my hand in his. "Just hang on, baby. Help is coming. I promise I'll take care of you." The false affection in his voice made me want to vomit. Hot tears spilled down my cheeks as I realized the man I loved had tried to kill me. The steady beep of the heart monitor greeted me as I blinked open my eyes. I was in a hospital room, my body aching. Nolan sat in a chair next to the bed, his leg heavily bandaged. He looked up as I stirred, relief washing over his face. "Oh, thank God you're awake," he gushed, grasping my hand. "I was so worried." My pulse quickened as memories came flooding back. The wheelchair careening down the hill, Nolan's cold confession, his botched attempt to kill me. I yanked my hand away. "Don't touch me," I hissed. Nolan drew back, feigning confusion. "Alara, what's wrong?" "You pushed me down that hill. You wanted me dead for the insurance money," I accused. Nolan's mouth fell open. "What?" "No, it was an accident. I would never hurt you, Alara. I tried to stop the wheelchair, but it went out of control. I jumped down the slope after you, but my leg got caught between the wheelchair spokes as I tried to stop your fall. I'm so sorry I couldn't prevent you from getting hurt." I studied his face, searching for any hint of deception, but found only earnest concern. "The doctors said you have a concussion," Nolan continued. "You must have imagined what happened due to the head trauma." Doubt crept into my mind. Could I have imagined it? My memories from that day were hazy. And now Nolan was injured too. I glanced at his bandaged leg, guilt replacing the suspicion. I'm sorry," I stammered. "I must be confused." Nolan squeezed my hand reassuringly. "It's okay. I'm just glad you're all right." Over the next few days, as my injuries healed, Nolan doted on me relentlessly. He fluffed my pillows, fed me soup, and held my hand when the pain meds wore off. His unwavering devotion made me feel foolish for ever questioning his intentions. But as the weeks passed, small things seemed off. Nolan became obsessed with money, poring over our accounts and insurance policies. He insisted on extravagant home modifications to accommodate my wheelchair, urging me to pay for them with my inheritance. One night, as I wheeled into the bedroom, Nolan slammed his laptop shut quickly. "What are you looking at?" I asked. "Oh, nothing important," he said, avoiding eye contact. While he was in the shower, I opened the laptop and accessed the browser history. My heart sank as I saw searches for how to increase your spouse's life insurance and big payouts for accidental deaths. Nolan hadn't been searching for accident victims to help. He was researching how to profit from my hypothetical accidental death. Bile rose in my throat as I finally accepted the truth. The devoted caregiver routine was an act to keep me under his control. The man I loved was trying to murder me. Over the next few weeks, I settled into a new normal. The doctors said my paralysis was permanent, so Nolan dutifully catered to my needs. But his mask slipped more each day. He obsessed over my inheritance, insisting I use it to convert our home into a wheelchair paradise. Meanwhile, he splurged on golf clubs, TVs, and gadgets. One night at dinner, he brought it up again. "Alara, I really think we should overhaul the entryway and widen the door frames downstairs. We need to make this house accessible for you. I pushed my food around my plate, anxiety churning in my gut. Those renovations will deplete the remainder of my inheritance. Can't we just make do? Nolan frowned, a flash of anger in his eyes. But don't you want to be comfortable and self-sufficient? This inheritance is meant to be used on you. I couldn't tell him the truth, that I was preserving those funds to escape someday. Let's just discuss it later, I said weakly, hoping to placate him. After dinner, I went upstairs and discovered Nolan had installed a new safe in our closet. He never mentioned it, and it was already locked. What was he hiding? A few nights later, Nolan left his email open on my laptop. My eyes fixed on one message from an insurance company with the subject line, "Policy Upgrade Request." Hands trembling, I opened it. Nolan had asked to increase my life insurance and add an accidental death payout. When I confronted him, he insisted it was just to provide for me in case of tragedy. But I knew it was premeditation. The final straw came a week later when I overheard Nolan on the phone scheduling a lavish housekeeping service. We didn't need it, but he seemed hell-bent on draining my inheritance with frivolous spending. After he hung up, I wheeled into the kitchen and tossed my checkbook onto the counter. I'll be handling my own finances going forward, I informed him coldly. Nolan's facade fully slipped, his face contorting in anger. How dare you? That money is as much mine as it is yours. It's my inheritance, I shot back, and I'm done letting you blow it. Nolan advanced on me, his voice a low snarl. You ungrateful bitch. After everything I've done for you. Adrenaline coursed through me. The jig is up, Nolan. I won't let you steal my inheritance while you plot my murder. Rage blazed in his eyes, but he quickly masked it. Don't be ridiculous, he sneered. I'll never understand your paranoia. But fine, manage your own money. It doesn't change my love and devotion. His duplicity infuriated me further, but I held my tongue. I needed to protect my finances at all costs until I could find a way out. Over the next few weeks, money became a battleground in our home. I took over the finances, carefully tracking every penny. When Nolan demanded I hire his lavish housekeeping service, I refused. We don't need it, I said firmly. I can handle the cleaning. Nolan's face darkened. But in your condition, I'm fine, I cut him off. We're not wasting money. After that, our arguments escalated. Nolan increasingly spent money behind my back, on expensive takeout when I cooked simple meals, new electronics, anything he desired. One day, I came home to find he had purchased a $3,000 Tempur-Pedic mattress without consulting me. Return it now, I demanded. Why are you being so controlling? He shot back. I'm just trying to make our home nicer for you. Bullshit, I spat. You're bleeding our accounts dry, trying to spend my inheritance before I cut you off. Nolan's expression contorted in rage. For a moment, I thought he might hit me, but he quickly smoothed his face into a mask of polite concern. Elara, I'm worried about you, he said gently. This obsession with money isn't healthy. You know I just want what's best for you. I wanted to scream at his pathetically transparent manipulation, but I held myself in check. Over the next week, small amounts of cash began disappearing from my purse. $20 here, $50 there. I knew Nolan was taking it. Meanwhile, the utilities and credit card bills skyrocketed without explanation. One night, I logged into our accounts and realized why. Nolan had increased the thermostat to 85 degrees, changed our cable package to premium channels, and added himself as an authorized user to my credit card. The next morning, I changed the thermostat back and called the cable company to downgrade our plan. When Nolan realized what I'd done, he cornered me in the kitchen. How dare you make changes without consulting me, he bellowed. I refused to cower. I'm correcting your frivolous spending. You're bleeding me dry. Nolan slammed his fist on the counter. That's my money, too. You don't get to control everything. It's my inheritance, I shouted back. I see exactly what you're doing, trying to drain that money, but I won't let you get away with it. Nolan stepped closer, looming over me. You'll regret this, he hissed. That money is the only reason I'm stuck playing your little wheelchair nursemaid. I recoiled at his words, my worst fears confirmed. Our relationship was nothing but a ruse designed to steal my inheritance. Get away from me, I snarled. We're done. I wheeled my chair backwards from him, my heart pounding with rage and adrenaline. The man I loved was gone, All that remained was a manipulating thief trying to drive me to bankruptcy or death. But I wouldn't back down or surrender my independence. Not to him, not to anyone. The battle lines were drawn. After our blow-up, I stopped speaking to Nolan altogether. The loving facade had slipped away, exposing his deceit. Now we coexisted in tense silence, speaking only when necessary. I continued scrutinizing our accounts, noticing strange inconsistencies. Gas and grocery expenditures were double what they should have been. When I asked Nolan about it, he got evasive. "I've just been driving more for errands," he muttered, "and groceries are expensive lately." I knew he was lying and pocketing the extra cash, but I had no proof. Suspicions gnawed at me. Where was he driving? Was he seeing someone else? I decided to find out. I called a private investigator and explained my situation. 2 days later, I received a large envelope in the mail. Hands shaking, I opened it to find photos of Nolan embracing a woman in front of a nice suburban home, captioned with an address. Bile rose in my throat as I realized the truth. Nolan had a secret family. Fury coursed through me. All the manipulation and lies weren't just about money. He was living a double life. I wanted to confront him right away, but I waited. I needed more proof before initiating the inevitable divorce. A few days later, the investigator provided bank records indicating Nolan had purchased the other home outright and was funneling money into a joint account with the other woman. Her name was Celia. Armed with evidence, I decided to confront Nolan at the hospital where he volunteered, a smokescreen for his deceit. As I wheeled into the hospital lobby, I spotted Nolan at the front desk flirting with a nurse. Before he saw me, I called out loudly, "Hey, Nolan, how's Celia doing?" Nolan's head whipped around, his face draining of color when he saw me. He quickly masked his shock with feigned confusion. "Who?" he stammered. I threw the envelope of evidence onto the desk. Photos and bank records spilled out. "Save it!" I spat. "I know about your little wifey across town. Did you really think you could get away with it?" Nolan glared at me coldly. "You don't know what you're talking about. This is absurd." I shook my head in disgust. "The jig is up, Nolan. I'm filing for divorce. Have fun splitting your assets between 2 households." I wheeled my chair away, Nolan calling after me desperately. But I didn't stop. The time for mercy was over. Over the next few days, I met with lawyers to initiate divorce proceedings, documenting Nolan's infidelity and financial deceit. I wanted to ruin him. Soon after, I sat Nolan down at home. "Here are your options," I told him icily. "Agree to a divorce with 0 spousal support, letting me keep 100% of my inheritance, or I'll make sure every one of your friends and family knows exactly what a cheating, swindling scumbag you are." Nolan pleaded with me, but I refused to back down. The man I loved was gone. In his place was a manipulative stranger who needed to pay. After I presented the evidence, Nolan had no choice but to agree to my terms. The divorce was swift and brutal, leaving him financially devastated. I walked away free, my inheritance intact, ready to begin a new chapter away from my lying, cheating ex-husband. What awaited me was unclear, but it had to be better than the nightmare I'd endured. In the months after the divorce, I focused on recovery and adapting to my new normal. My lawyer ensured I received a generous alimony, allowing me to afford live-in care. Though my paralysis persisted, my new doctor encouraged me to stay positive. "Your condition is still evolving," he assured me. "With rehabilitation, you may regain functionality." His optimism lifted my spirits. For the first time since the accident, I had hope. During one appointment, Dr. Fields reviewed my records closely, his brow furrowing. "Let's do some fresh scans," he said. The next day, I received an urgent call from Dr. Fields. "You need to come in immediately," he said gravely. "There are developments." My pulse quickened anxiously as I wheeled into his office. His expression was grim. "What is it?" I asked shakily. "The scans show your spinal cord damage is treatable," he said. "Your previous physician failed to detect this. With surgery, you could walk again." I reeled in shock. "What? But my ex-husband said my paralysis was permanent. Are you saying it's reversible?" Dr. Fields nodded. "Given proper treatment, your prognosis is very good. I believe your previous doctor misinterpreted the scans. Your ex likely concealed this from you." The revelation hit me like a freight train. Nolan had lied to keep me in a wheelchair, dependent on him. Fury boiled up inside me. "That bastard!" I exploded. "He made me believe I'd never walk again. He wanted me helpless so he could control me and access my money. I'm very sorry, Dr. Field said sympathetically. Unfortunately, traumatic spinal cord injuries are often misdiagnosed, but the good news is we can correct this. I'd like to schedule surgery right away. Overwhelmed with emotion, I broke down in tears. For months, I believed I'd spend my life in a wheelchair at the mercy of my lying, cheating ex-husband. But now a chance at freedom stood before me. The night before surgery, I met Nolan at a cafe at his desperate request. He begged me to take him back, claiming he'd changed. Did you know my paralysis was reversible? I demanded. Did you keep it from me? Nolan's silence was damning. Seething with rage, I slapped him hard across the face. You soulless monster! You made me believe I was trapped when I could have walked away from you. Well, tomorrow I'm getting surgery so I can dance on your grave someday. I pray I never see you again. I left Nolan crying at the table, his pathetic apologies echoing behind me. The time for mercy and forgiveness had passed. Tomorrow, a new beginning awaited me. The surgery was a success. In the difficult weeks of recovery and rehabilitation that followed, spite fueled me. I imagined trampling over Nolan's broken body as I reclaimed my strength, vowing he'd never rob me of independence again. On the day I took my first solo steps, tears of joy and relief streamed down my face. I was free at last, ready to walk into a new life on my own terms. Nolan had failed. My backbone remained unbroken. In the weeks after my surgery, I wasted no time seeking final vengeance against Nolan. Legally, financially, I wanted to ruin him completely. I met with my lawyer, providing documentation of Nolan's lies about my medical prognosis. We incorporated it into the divorce proceedings to show premeditation and abuse. Nolan wouldn't just lose money in the split, his reputation would be destroyed. You have ample grounds for additional damages, my lawyer said. We can sequester his assets and income sources. He won't have a cent left when we're through with him. Good, I replied coldly. Take everything. I realized Nolan's bank fraud likely extended beyond just me. I contacted his employer and provided evidence that he had embezzled from client accounts. They immediately opened an investigation, alerting the authorities. Nolan desperately tried to convince me not to expose him further. He even had the audacity to suggest reconciliation. Alara, haven't you punished me enough? He pleaded on the phone. I know I made mistakes, but we can still repair this. I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you. The only mistake I made was ever trusting you, I spat back. You tried to steal my inheritance and leave me helpless. There's no coming back from that. I hung up, feeling re-energized in my mission to obliterate him. The next day, I called his half-sister, Layla, who he always clashed with. I told her everything, from the infidelity to the financial deceit. I knew he was selfish, but this is unbelievable, she fumed. What a wretched snake. He's dead to me. I'll make sure everyone knows what a vile pig he is. In the weeks that followed, Nolan's life unraveled spectacularly. Friends and family shunned him. He lost his job once the fraud was exposed. Even Celia kicked him out once she learned what he did to me, disgusted by his abhorrent behavior. The divorce finalized with me receiving 80% of our shared assets plus permanent alimony payments, money he no longer had. He'd be financially ruined for years. My lawyer called one final time. It's done, he said with satisfaction. Your ex-husband is destitute. His reputation is shredded. You won't be hearing from him again anytime soon. A surge of relief and joy coursed through me. The bitter seeds I'd sown had bloomed into Nolan's complete destruction. He was finally reaping what he deserved, and I was forever free from his poisonous hold on my life. The day my divorce from Nolan was finalized, I walked out of the courthouse with my head held high, the sunlight warming my face. The settlement had been everything I wanted. Nolan was left penniless and alone, forced to start anew with nothing but his wretched self. In the months that followed, I reveled in my freedom and independence. I returned to work, reconnected with old friends, traveled to places I'd always dreamed of seeing. Whenever despair crept in, I repeated my mantra, Nolan has no power over you now. My new therapist helped me process the emotional trauma I'd endured. It's important you don't dwell on anger, she counseled gently. Focus your energy on healing so you can fully embrace this new chapter of your life. I took her advice to heart, channeling my energy into constructive pursuits that enriched my life. I volunteered at a women's shelter, helping those escaping abusive situations. It strengthened my resolve to never again ignore red flags in a relationship. On my birthday a few months later, my friends threw a party celebrating my freedom. As we raised our glasses, Sarah made a toast. Here's to Alara, for her resilience, courage, and for shattering the chains of her miserable marriage. No one deserves this fresh start more than her. Their cheers filled me with newfound hope. The old Alara, helpless, naive, trapped, was gone. A wiser, stronger woman had taken her place. Slowly, I began dating again. After some duds, I met Adam, a kind divorcee and single father. While affection bloomed between us, I took it slow, keeping healthy boundaries. "I'm so glad you're being cautious," Sarah told me. "After everything you've endured, you deserve someone who treats you like the queen you are." While Adam was nothing like Nolan, trusting again didn't come easily. But in time, as his sincerity was proven, my walls came down, brick by brick. One night, as we strolled in the park, I paused under a canopy of twinkling lights strung between the trees. Here, surrounded by the beauty of new beginnings, my heart opened once more. When Adam proposed several months later, I accepted joyfully. While shadows of the past still lurked, the flame burning inside me was stronger. I was prepared for whatever lay ahead, holding fast to hope. On my second wedding day, I marveled at the new chapters life offers, even after devastation. With grace, courage, and perseverance, dormant seeds of joy still blossom in time. As I walked down the aisle on Adam's arm, tears pricked my eyes. My broken spirit had proven resilient. Love and vitality now stretched brightly before me. While Nolan's betrayal nearly extinguished my light, my inner inferno ultimately raged too strong to suffocate. I am more than a victim or survivor. I am the master of my fate, and my greatest triumphs still await.
After my marriage, my overbearing and manipulative mother-in-law demanded that I transfer my $200 million company to my husband and take on the duties of a housewife. I refused. At a family gathering, she shouted at me. In a shocking display, she lunged across the dinner table, grabbing my hair and yanking it violently, insulting me in front of everyone. The guests were stunned, and although some tried to intervene, my husband did nothing to stop his mother's attack, revealing his deep submission to Helen's toxic influence. I kept calm, but my silence was filled with burning anger. I decided to seek revenge with my quick secret plan. The next day, I got a shocking surprise. Their tears of desperation were the sweet sound of revenge I had been waiting for all along. My name is Emily Lawson, and I've always believed that hard work and determination can carve out a successful life. At 35 years old, I am the CEO of a thriving company in San Francisco, valued at $200 million. I've poured my heart and soul into building this business from the ground up, and every achievement has been a testament to my commitment. I've never been one to focus on personal relationships. My work has always come first. Growing up in a small town, I learned early on that dreams require effort. My parents instilled in me the importance of education and perseverance. I worked tirelessly throughout my school years, earning scholarships that eventually led me to a prestigious university. I graduated at the top of my class with a degree in business management. From that moment on, I knew I wanted to start my own company, and nothing would stand in my way. For years, I dedicated myself to the growth of my company, focusing solely on building my brand and reputation. Late nights and early mornings were my routine. My friends often joked that I was married to my work, and they weren't entirely wrong. I found fulfillment in my career, in negotiating contracts, and in watching my dreams materialize. Love seemed like a distraction, something I didn't need. But that all changed when I met Mark Anderson. Mark was the son of William Anderson, a businessman whose company had a long-standing partnership with mine. Our first meeting was unremarkable, yet something about him intrigued me. He was handsome, with charming blue eyes that sparkled with enthusiasm. At first, I found his youthful spirit refreshing. He was 38, but carried an air of immaturity that made me smile. We hit it off during a business dinner, and I began to see glimpses of a different life, one that included companionship. As our relationship blossomed, I saw the potential for something special. Mark made me laugh, and we shared a passion for entrepreneurship. However, There was a shadow looming over our relationship: his mother, Helen Anderson. She was an overbearing figure in Mark's life, demanding and controlling. I dismissed my concerns initially, thinking I could manage the situation. After all, I was a successful businesswoman. How hard could it be to navigate a relationship with a man and his mother? Months passed, and we decided to get married. The wedding was grand, filled with family and friends. Mark promised me that he would support my career and my decisions. I thought I was marrying a partner who would uplift me. But soon after the wedding, I realized I had made a grave mistake. Helen wasted no time in making her demands known. It started subtly, a few casual comments about how a wife should prioritize her husband over her career. I brushed it off, reminding myself that I had worked too hard to let anyone dictate my life. But Helen's pressure increased with each passing day. One afternoon, while we were having tea, she bluntly stated, "Emily, you should consider transferring your business to Mark's name. It's what a good wife would do." I stared at her, shocked. "That's not possible, Helen. My company is my life's work. I can't just hand it over." "Why not?" she insisted, her voice rising. "You're his wife now. Your job should come second to your family." That was just the beginning. Helen's persistent demands became more aggressive. I could sense Mark's discomfort whenever I rejected his mother's suggestions, but he never intervened. It was as if he was caught in a web of loyalty to her, and it frustrated me deeply. The real turning point came during a family gathering at the Anderson home. I had hoped that this would be a chance for us to connect as a family. The evening started well, filled with laughter and good food. However, Helen seized the moment to confront me publicly. As guests mingled, she called me over. "Emily, can we talk?" she said with a forced smile, her eyes narrowing slightly. "I really think we need to settle this business matter." I felt my heart race. "What do you mean?" I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "You need to transfer your company to Mark," she demanded, her voice echoing in the room. "It's time to put family first." The room fell silent, all eyes on us. I felt the weight of the guests' stares. "I cannot do that, Helen," I responded firmly. "My company is my responsibility. I built it with my own hands." Her face flushed with anger, and before I knew it, she lunged across the table, grabbing my hair and yanking it violently. Gasps filled the room as I felt the shock of pain ripple through me. "How dare you defy me?" she shouted, her voice dripping with venom. Guests tried to intervene, but Mark just stood there, frozen, revealing his deep submission to Helen's toxic influence. The humiliation burned inside me as I looked around, realizing the moment had escalated into something far beyond a simple disagreement. Despite the pain and humiliation, I kept my composure, biting back tears. I wouldn't let her see me break. I silently vowed that this would not be the end of my story. I could feel the anger boiling within me, and it wasn't just for the attack. It was for the realization that I had allowed this woman to manipulate my life. As I walked away from that gathering, I decided then and there that I would not be a victim. I would find a way to turn the tables and take back my power. The seeds of revenge were planted. I just needed the right opportunity. Little did they know, I was more than just a successful businesswoman. I was determined to reclaim what was mine and to teach Helen and Mark a lesson they would never forget. The next chapters of my life were about to unfold, and I was ready to fight back. After the incident at the Anderson family gathering, a simmering anger ignited within me. I had always prided myself on my ability to overcome challenges, and this humiliation would not be the end of my story. Instead, it would mark the beginning of a new chapter. One where I would reclaim my power and show both Mark and Helen that I was not someone to be trifled with. In the days that followed, I focused intently on my work, burying myself in my responsibilities. I wanted to distract myself from the humiliation, but I also needed to formulate a plan. I couldn't let this situation fester. My company had grown to $200 million not just through hard work, but also through strategic decisions. I needed to think strategically now. The first step was to gather information. I reached out to my contacts within the industry and began investigating William Anderson's company. I wanted to understand their financial standing and any weaknesses I could exploit. As I delved deeper, I discovered that their company had been facing difficulties for quite some time. The management was out of touch, and their sales had been declining steadily. It was the kind of vulnerability I could work with. During this time, I also made a conscious effort to maintain a facade of normalcy in my relationship with Mark. I put on a brave face whenever I was around him and his mother. Mark would often talk about how proud he was of his family's legacy, and I'd nod along, hiding my true feelings. It's important to support family, I would say, trying to blend in. Meanwhile, inside, I was plotting a course that would change everything. I began to network more aggressively, attending events and seminars where I could connect with influential figures in the business community. I was building alliances and reinforcing my reputation as a formidable businesswoman. My goal was clear: to position myself in a way that I could either take over or significantly undermine the Anderson family business. One afternoon, while discussing strategies with my financial advisor, I mentioned my intentions. "Emily, if you want to take control of the Andersons company, you'll need to buy a controlling share. But you'll have to be discreet. If they catch wind of your plans, they'll do everything to sabotage you." I nodded, absorbing his words. "I know. I'll need to be strategic and patient. This isn't just about revenge. It's about showing them that I am not a pawn in their game." With renewed determination, I devised a financial strategy. I started to quietly purchase shares of William Anderson's company on the stock market. The more shares I acquired, the stronger my position became. I worked late into the nights, crunching numbers and analyzing market trends. Every small victory fueled my resolve. Simultaneously, I made sure to document every encounter I had with Helen and Mark. I wanted to gather evidence of their manipulative behavior, knowing it could serve as leverage later. Whenever I visited the Anderson home, I paid close attention to their dynamics. I noted how Helen often belittled Mark, using guilt to control him. It only reinforced my belief that they needed to be taught a lesson. One evening, while I was at a business dinner, I overheard a conversation between two industry insiders discussing the Anderson family's faltering reputation. "If they don't turn things around soon, they might have to sell off parts of the business," one said, shaking his head. The words sent a thrill down my spine. This was the confirmation I needed. I could move in for the kill, at just the right moment. As weeks passed, I became more entrenched in my plans. I reached out to potential investors who were looking for opportunities. My goal was to gather enough backing to make a substantial bid for a controlling stake in the Andersons company. I felt an exhilarating mix of anticipation and determination. I was no longer just Emily Lawson, the businesswoman. I was the architect of my own revenge, carefully crafting a strategy that would lead to their downfall. I envisioned the moment when I would stand before them, revealing my triumph and turning their world upside down. Every time I thought about that dinner table confrontation, the anger surged anew, igniting my resolve. I was going to show them that they had underestimated me. Their arrogance and manipulation would come back to haunt them. Soon, I would rise like a phoenix from the ashes, leaving the Andersons to confront the consequences of their actions. The path was set and I was ready. Little did they know that a storm was brewing, one that would change the course of our lives forever. My patience and strategy were about to pay off, and the final act of my revenge was drawing closer. As the weeks turned into months, my plan to take control of the Anderson family business took shape. Each day, I diligently worked behind the scenes, quietly acquiring shares of William Anderson's company. My financial advisor guided me through the intricate process of building a stake that would give me the leverage I needed. I felt an electric thrill each time I received updates on my acquisitions, knowing I was one step closer to my goal. Meanwhile, I maintained my facade around Mark and Helen. At family dinners, I forced myself to engage in lighthearted conversations, even as I mentally prepared for the moment I would unveil my plans. Mark remained blissfully unaware of the storm brewing just beneath the surface. He often praised his mother. "You've built a great family legacy, Mom." "I hope to keep it going," he would say, and I would nod, suppressing the urge to roll my eyes. One evening, during a particularly lavish dinner at the Anderson home, I felt the tension rising. Helen, dressed to the nines, was in rare form, boasting about her family's accomplishments. Our company has always been the leader in this industry, she proclaimed, her tone dripping with superiority. But with the right vision, it can go even further. I smiled politely, my heart racing. Yes, Helen, but a vision must adapt to the changing times, I replied, knowing the words held deeper significance. I wanted her to understand that her outdated views were about to come crashing down. That night, after the guests had left, I found myself alone with Mark. He poured us both a glass of wine and casually mentioned how proud he was of his family's legacy. It's a big responsibility, but I know we'll keep it strong, he said, confidence radiating from him. I really wish you'd consider stepping back from your company, Emily. I mean, wouldn't it be nice to focus on families? His words stung, and I felt the familiar rush of anger. Mark, you know how important my company is to me. I won't just give it up, I said, trying to keep my tone steady. I could see his expression change, a mix of confusion and concern creeping into his eyes. The following week, I received a tip from one of my industry contacts about an upcoming board meeting for William Anderson's company. This was my chance. I decided I would attend and present myself as a potential partner. I knew this would send shockwaves through the Anderson family, especially once they learned that I was no longer just the wife of their son, but a formidable player in the business world. On the day of the meeting, I arrived early, my heart racing with excitement. The boardroom was filled with stern-looking executives, and I took a seat at the table, confident and poised. When the meeting began, I introduced myself, keeping my tone professional but friendly. I'm Emily Lawson, and I believe I can offer your company a fresh perspective, I stated, noting the surprised expressions around the room. As I presented my ideas, I could see skepticism on some faces, especially among those loyal to Helen. But I also noticed intrigue. I highlighted how my company could benefit from a merger and the advantages of innovation and adaptation in a rapidly changing market. The more I spoke, the more I could sense the shift in the room. After my presentation, I could feel the tension building. Helen, who had just entered the room, looked furious. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice sharp. "You're not in a position to make demands, Emily." With that, I felt a wave of confidence wash over me. "Actually, Helen, I believe I am," I replied calmly, meeting her gaze without flinching. "You see, I now own a significant portion of your family's company, and I'm here to discuss its future." Gasps filled the room. The stunned silence that followed was almost deafening, and I knew I had them exactly where I wanted. Mark's eyes widened, his mouth agape as he processed the revelation. It was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment to turn the tables and show them that I would no longer be a pawn in their game. The stage was set for the final act of my revenge, and I was ready to make them confront the consequences of their arrogance. The balance of power was about to shift dramatically, and I couldn't wait to see their reaction. The atmosphere in the boardroom turned electric as my revelation hung in the air. I could see Helen's face turn an alarming shade of red, her composure slipping away. "This is unacceptable," she shouted, her voice rising. "You have no right to interfere with our family business." But I stood my ground, a calm smile on my face. "Actually, Helen, I have every right. As a significant shareholder, I'm here to ensure that the company thrives. It's time for some changes, and I intend to lead them." Mark, still in shock, turned to his mother, trying to make sense of what he had just heard. "What do you mean, Emily? You're part of this?" His voice was a mix of confusion and disbelief, as if he couldn't fathom how I had outmaneuvered them. "Yes, Mark. While you were focused on family legacies and traditions, I was building my own legacy," I replied, my tone unwavering. "And now, your family's business needs a new direction, one that embraces innovation instead of clinging to outdated practices." Helen's frustration was palpable, her fingers trembling at her sides. "You think you can just waltz in here and take over? You're nothing without my family's name," she retorted, her voice dripping with disdain. I leaned forward, my eyes locked onto hers. "That's where you're wrong, Helen. I built my company from the ground up, without anyone's help. I'm not just a name, I'm a force in this industry. And you've underestimated me every step of the way." The other board members were captivated, some exchanging glances of astonishment. I continued, addressing them directly. If we want this company to survive, it must adapt. I propose a merger that will revitalize both our businesses. My expertise can guide us to greater success. As the meeting progressed, I outlined my vision, detailing the benefits of the merger and the strategic advantages it would bring. The tension in the room gradually shifted from hostility to curiosity. I could sense that I was gaining traction, and my confidence soared. However, Helen wasn't finished yet. "This isn't over, Emily. You think you can just take everything from us? I won't allow it." Her voice was laced with desperation, and I could see the wheels turning in her mind as she plotted her next move. "That's the thing, Helen," I said, my voice calm but firm. "I'm not taking anything from you. I'm giving you a chance to adapt and thrive. But if you refuse to accept reality, then you will face the consequences of your actions." With that, I concluded my presentation, and the room fell silent. I looked around, gauging the reactions of the board members. Slowly, they began to nod in agreement, some whispering to one another. I knew then that I had won them over. Helen stood, her face a mixture of fury and disbelief. "You'll regret this, Emily. You've made a powerful enemy today," she spat before storming out of the room. As she left, I turned to Mark, who still seemed dazed. "Mark, this is a new beginning for both of us. If you're willing to embrace change, we can build something incredible together." He looked at me, uncertainty in his eyes. "I don't know what to think right now, Emily. My whole world feels upside down." "Then let's turn it right side up," I replied, offering him a reassuring smile. "Together, we can make this work." In the following weeks, the transition was anything but smooth. Helen rallied against me, trying to sway the board and discredit my plans. But I was ready for her. I had anticipated her moves and gathered evidence of her past mismanagement, ready to present it at the next board meeting. When the day came, I stood in front of the board once again, armed with facts and figures. "You see, this isn't just about me. It's about the future of this company. If we allow Helen to continue her outdated practices, we will face dire consequences. I have the data to prove it." As I laid out my case, I could see the tide turning against Helen. The board began to see her for who she truly was, a controlling, manipulative force that had stifled innovation and growth. By the end of the meeting, the board voted unanimously in favor of my proposal. Helen's reign was over, and I felt a surge of triumph wash over me. I had not only secured my position but had also paved the way for a brighter future. As I walked out of the meeting room, I couldn't help but feel a sense of empowerment. I had taken control of my life and my company, transforming from a victim of manipulation into a powerful leader. I was ready to lead this new chapter with strength and integrity, and I had learned that betrayal could lead to unexpected triumphs. In the end, I realized that true power comes not just from success in business, but from knowing your worth and never allowing anyone to take that from you. I had won the battle, but the war of business and resilience would always continue.